and welcome to another episode of All About That Base. Today we're going to be looking at how I make my jungle rock base. Now, I designed this base originally because I had a model of a kind of big bird who looked like he was climbing up a rock or kind of posed on a slant. So I decided to come up with this base using pieces of slate. Now I set my base at an angle like this, but obviously you don't have to do that if you don't want to. If you want a nice flat finish, you can do the same thing, and you'll see during the video which steps you can miss out to do that. Now, this isn't a massively complicated base like some of my others that take loads of time and loads of fiddly details, but I like this base because it's quite fun to play around with. So obviously I'm putting certain tufts and greenery on there, but you can really go mad with this and just do whatever you want with it. So let's head to the table and I will see you in a bit. So the first thing you're going to want to do is prepare your base for applying the slate. And to do that, I am using Vallejo's white Pumice stone texture paint. And as you probably know, I use this in a lot of my bases because it creates a really nice realistic ground texture, but you can also use it as a kind of cement to press things into, and then once it's dry, things are stuck to your base. It just kind of saves you a step of gluing. So first off, I'm just going to apply a small piece of slate. And then once I can get the bottle open, I'm going to apply a tiny little drop of super glue and then put another piece of slate onto that. And that's just to raise it up to give that slanted look that I was talking about. Then we're going to put the main piece of slate on. And while it's all still wet, you can just push it into the position that you want. And as I said at the beginning, if you don't want that raise to it, you can just put the flat piece of slate on. Next, we're just going to create a few extra rocks, and I've done this with some little scraps left over from pieces of cork bark, and I'm just going to push those in various places around the main piece of slate. I have now primed this in Mechanicus standard grey, and the first thing I'm doing is just painting around the rocks on the earthy bits in Steel Legion Drab. And I'm just being as careful as I can not to get that on any of the rocks. So I'm just kind of going in between and underneath and just making sure that all of the ground area is covered with this colour. Once that's dry, the next step is to apply a light dry brush of Zandri Dust just onto the earth parts, and that's just so that it gives a natural colour if any of that shows through once you've put all of your other bits and pieces onto the base. And then we move on to dry brushing and highlighting the rock. So I'm starting with a relatively heavy dry brush of Dawnstone. And I'm just making sure that I catch all the edges of all the rocks and down the sides, and just trying to bring out a lot of those natural ridges in the rock. And then we're going to go slightly lighter with some Administratum Grey. And again, just going over all of the little ridges and the edges just to bring out those highlights. Making sure that you remember to do the little rocks that are in the ground as well. And then finally, we're going to do a last highlight of Terminitus Stone, which is the Citadel dry paint. And that's really just to catch the very edges of all of the rocks and the main piece of slate there. And as you can see, it really starts to bring out the details once you do this step. Once that's finished, we're just going to hit the whole thing with a wash of Athonian Camoshade. Now, the reason I'm doing that is because I want a slightly green tint to the rocks and everything, but it doesn't matter if you put this on the earth as well, because it just adds to the effect and the natural colours in nature. And you can see that by applying this wash, it's actually making those dry brush highlights pop even more and look even more natural. And then we're just going to go over the whole thing again with some Agrax Earthshade, and that just kind of darkens the recesses in the rocks and gives a bit more of a contrast. And next we are going to put some ground cover down. Now this is something I've made myself from sieved coconut fibres, and then I've just added 2 or 3 different colours of flock. Now I'm going to apply this with super glue rather than PVA, just because I find that this works better for the coconut fibre. And once you've put it on, you can even go back over it with more super glue, and it just solidifies it without giving it that kind of messy PVA look. So I'm putting that all around everywhere that has the brown paint on, and then I'm just going to leave that to dry for a few minutes, just to make sure it's all stuck and soaked in. And then we're going to do our Taylor Swift and shake it off. We're going to tap off all the excess, and then this is what you are left with. It's quite a natural ground colour look. So this is the bit where you can really go to town and do whatever you fancy. So these are some tufts I got from Geek Gaming, Luke's APS. So I'm just going to put one of those in that little space there. And then to add a little bit of colour, I'm also using the red tufts from Geek Gaming, Luke's APS. Now I find these to be a little bit big sometimes, so what I've done is cut it in half, and unfortunately I couldn't see where my camera was, so I'm just putting the 2 halves of those around one of the rocks that's on the ground, and it just gives it that kind of nice bright look to it. So then I am moving on to some tiny tufts from Gamer's Grass. Now I absolutely love these because they are so small and you can just use them to fill these gaps in rocks, and it kind of looks like natural moss. And you get about 500 on the sheet, and you can just take them off and stuff them into all the nooks and crannies, and I just think it gives a really nice natural look to these kind of bases. So next I've decided to put an extra little bit of red on the other side as well, just to kind of balance it out a little bit and just keep that colour throughout. And now this is again from Geek Gaming, Luke's APS. This is his tree canopy. Now it comes in a huge bag, and it is absolutely great for making natural looking jungle type foliage. You just break a little piece off. And again, I would recommend using super glue for this, just because it helps it to stick a little bit better. And the great thing about it is that the colour varies. You can have browns and greens in there, and you can just break off any little pieces you want and just put those in wherever you think it looks natural. Apologies for the cat in the background. She doesn't like it when I make videos. So next what I'm doing is I found these little dry ferns, and now these are made from really thin paper and you have to be really careful taking them off, but once they're attached with a little bit of super glue, I think they look really great and quite realistic. And then all that's left to do is to paint the rim, and again I'm using black, but you can use any colour you want. So there you go, that's my jungle base. Now I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel, and that way you will be made aware whenever I release new content. And as always, I'd love to hear your feedback, so drop me a note down in the comments and I will get back to you. And I have linked my Facebook and Instagram pages down in the description, so give me a follow on there and you'll get to see all the other stuff that I am up to. Now I will be back on Wednesday with another back to basics video where I'm going to be showing you how I make my really grim pile of bones base. So until then, happy hobbying.